It is really awful that up to today we still do not yet have a full-fledged parliament for the people of Africa. And what we currently have is a Pan-African parliament, which is part of the treaty establishing the African Economic Community, which was part of the Abuja Treaty 1991. And in the year 2000, the protocol establishing the Pan-African Parliament was signed at Lome in Togo, and it was ratified in the year 2001 at Site in Libya. And the Pan-African Parliament sat for the first time on the 18th of March 2004 at Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, but currently has its headquarters at Midrand in South Africa. But still, Africa is in need of a parliament. Why? Africa is in need of a parliament because the Pan-African Parliament is not yet fully a parliament. It does not have power to make laws, it's only an advisory council. But Africa needs a parliament. Number one, Africa needs a parliament in order to carry the people of along in the affairs of Africa. One of the reasons why Muammar Gaddafi could not achieve the United States of Africa when he tried in the year 2010, 2011, before he was killed in the year 20th of October 2011, is because he could not carry the people of Africa along. He carried the leaders of Africa along, but the people did not even know what was going on in Africa. We need to have an African parliament in order for the people to know what is going on in the African continent. The people of Africa must be carried along because the continent of Africa does not belong to the leaders of Africa alone. God has given the continent to the leaders and to the people, and you cannot do anything in Africa only by the leaders. The leaders are there, the people should also be involved. True leadership and true unity of the people is not the unity of the leaders alone. It is the unity of the leaders and the people of that nation that is the true unity of a nation. Therefore, we must have an African parliament because the parliament is the institution that unites the leaders and people of a nation together. And an African parliament is that parliament that can bring the people of Africa together. Number two, Africa must have a parliament to have lasting peace and to have positive peace in Africa. What we have mostly in Africa is negative peace. Where there is no conflict going on, is negative peace. And negative peace is peace in the absence of justice. Peace where there is war going on, kind of cold war, but physically nobody is shooting. That is what we mostly have in the African continent. You have structural imbalances, you have structural violence, and there is also a lot of open conflicts going on in the African continent. And the African Union has always been responding when the conflicts have become very open and very damaging, and they try to water down the conflict or try to douse it, and it takes many years to do that. And there's an adage that says prevention is better than cure, and a stitch in time saves 9. And that is what we should be talking about now. How to prevent conflict, how to make sure that there is positive peace in Africa. Positive peace is the presence of justice. Peace is the presence and acceptance of justice. You can't talk about positive peace without justice. The African Parliament is the institution that should ensure that there is positive peace in Africa, because it is the institution that will allow the people of Africa to air their views, to air their wrongs, to show that they have been hurt, and tell the people of Africa how rights can be made from wrongs that have occurred. If there was the African Parliament, the crisis in Sudan, which lasted for over 30 years, would not have occurred. We need a parliament not just to bring resolutions to conflict, but to prevent conflict. And that is the African Parliament we're talking about. Number 3, we need the African Parliament to create other institutions that we need in Africa. For example, we need a full-fledged African army, not just the African standby force. We need a full-fledged army that can fight to bring peace to Africa. For example, the Al-Shabaab crisis, the Boko Haram wars, these wars have lingered. The Boko Haram war has stayed for over 10 years. This is since 2010, and we're still talking about Boko Haram war. But if we had an African army, not just an African standby force, we can have a force that can deal with Boko Haram and end the conflict once and for all. The African Parliament can create such an institution. Without the African Parliament, you cannot have an African army, because it is when you have representatives from each part of Africa, from not just the heads of states, but from different groups in Africa, that you can now have an army. Because you cannot have an African army when the people of Africa do not even know or do not have representatives to represent them and say we want to have an African army. So it is the African Parliament that can create a full-fledged army for Africa, and that army can then use that full force to bring peace to Africa. Where there's need to use force, they use force. Also, the African Central Bank, which was supposed to have had headquarters in Abuja for a long period of time now, it is the African Parliament that should make that happen. African language, it is the African Parliament that should give Africa an African language, and it will stand. Why? Because when you have representatives from different parts of Africa in the African Parliament, whatever decision they take, they consult the people, and people give them the power to go ahead to do it. That is the key to achieving all this. Number 4, we need an African Parliament in order to begin the unification process of Africa. The unification of Africa into the United Continent of Africa is very, very simple. The key to having the United Continent of Africa is the African Parliament. The African Parliament is the key for surety, clarity, and an acceptability for the creation of the United States of Africa. Surety is that once you have an African Parliament, the United States of Africa is sure. We can pass a resolution through the African Parliament for the creation of the United States of Africa, and we'll have it. 2, for clarity, when we have the African Parliament creating the United States of Africa, every African will be sure of what is going on and will accept it. And thirdly, for acceptability, once we have a parliament and the people of Africa make their inputs through the parliament and through referendum and through other forms of opinion or opinion sharing or public opinions, then all Africans will accept the United States of Africa. But if you create it by the club of African leaders only, most Africans will say no to it, because that is not the right way to go about it. Let us have a union that brings the people of Africa together with their leaders through the parliament, and we shall have the United States of Africa. Or fifthly, we need African Parliament in order to hold African leaders accountable. Currently, the African continent is the poorest continent in the world, and yet we have the least accountable leadership in the entire world. How can we that need the most accountable leaders have the least accountable leaders? How can we, the continent that needs the least level of corruption in the world, be the most corrupt in the world? According to the Corruption Perception Index of Transparency International, Africa scores 32% in terms of administrative cleanliness. That is a sort of F. Whereas Europe scores 66/100, which is a form of B. The corruption in Africa is too much, and we have to end it. And most of the problems of corruption in Africa is from the leaders. On top of that, in the year 2014, at the Malabo Protocol signed on the 27th of June 2014, the African Union gave African leaders a sort of immunity from being tried by the African Court of Justice. This is in addition to the immunities that they enjoy at national levels. So African leaders are not accountable at national levels, and African leaders are not accountable at the continental level. Should that be so, how are we going to have development in Africa where the leaders are not accountable to anybody? Whereas European leaders that are less corrupt or less corrupt than African leaders are very much accountable, and they resign at the drop of a hat. African leaders will hold on to power even when the leaders are suffering from poverty. Even when his country is the poverty capital of the world, he will still go for a second tenure and still insist on power and use force to quell protest. The African Parliament should hold such leaders accountable. Any leader that breeds corruption in Africa, the African Parliament should hold the leader responsible for corruption in that country. Any country in Africa that is not doing fine, the African Parliament should hold such leaders accountable. We are not supposed to have responsibility placed on any person in Africa without accountability demanded from the person. It is either you take no responsibility if you won't take accountability, or you take accountability together with responsibility. And the African Parliament should make that happen. We must have the African Parliament to be a voice for the people of Africa. Currently, the most powerful institution in the whole world, politically speaking at least, is the United Nations, which was formed in the year 1945. The United Nations has 6 principal organs, chief of which is the United Nations Security Council. The UN Security Council has 15 members, 5 which are permanent, including permanent members include US, UK, China, France. Not a single African country is part of the permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. Then you have the remaining 10 members whose tenures last for just 2 years. And the 5 permanent members have what they call veto power. The veto power means that once one permanent member says no to any resolution passed by the United Nations Security Council, that is the end. And the United Nations Security Council has the power to admit members into the United Nations, to pass resolutions on behalf of the United Nations organization, has the power to create peacekeeping forces. It is the most powerful in the world. And the people of Africa have been pressing that Africa must have at least 2 permanent members and 2 non-permanent members in the United Nations Security Council, all to no avail. The key to achieving that feat is the African Parliament. Once the African Parliament passes a resolution mandating the United Nations to give Africa 2 permanent members and 2 non-permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, the United Nations Security Council will respond and will grant it to Africa. At least, even if it is 1 permanent member and 1 non-permanent member. But if we keep going about it individually or trying to lobby it through other political means, the probability is still there, but it's very weak. The African Parliament should serve as the voice of the people of Africa who are passing through racism across, even in Africa and across the world. Look at what happened to Africans in Sudan. Some Africans are still slaves in Mauritania to the Arabs. In America, the people of Africa have not yet been indemnified for the slave trade that they suffered. Even the continent of Africa that bled for over 500 years of colonization and slavery, we have not yet been paid our reparation. It is the African Parliament that should demand reparation for the people of Africa. African Parliament is the organization that should go for reparation for Africa and get it. That is the key to getting reparation for Africa. The African Parliament should serve as the voice of Africans, not just only native Africans, but all people of African descent who still call themselves Africans. Finally, the African Parliament should decolonize Africa. Decolonization is the undoing of colonization, to remove every vestige of colonization and neocolonialism. Currently, what we have in Africa, as we call countries, African countries, these are products of colonization. The Berlin Conference of 1884-1885 was when these countries were created and handed over to Africans. They were not even created to serve as African countries. They were European spheres of influence. France, this country belongs to you. Britain, this one is your own. Portugal, see your share. Congo, take your Belgium, take your share. Congo. Now we call these things African countries. And we're wondering where there's always conflict in all these countries. Europeans created them for themselves, and the Europeans still rule those countries through proximity rulership. They gave us flag independence, physical independence. But because they created all these countries, they created systems that will make these countries not to work, and will keep falling back on them to decide what will happen in all these countries. Why can't we be bold enough in Africa to say that we don't want these countries that the Europeans created for us and create our own countries ourselves? What is wrong with that? Why do we keep fighting against those who fight against the Berlin Conference and we claim that we are Africans and we love Africa? How? Why should Africans not have the right or power to create countries according to their own choices? Europeans created the countries in Europe, Americans created theirs, Asians created theirs. Why can't we in Africa decide for ourselves the kind of countries that we have in Africa and create it for ourselves, and then have the United States of Africa as the gigantic superstate of Africa, a superpower for us? It is through the African Parliament that we should go for that. The African Parliament should also create the African Ethnic Congress in order to address issues of ethnicity in Africa. If we do not have all this, we'll keep fighting ourselves. We'll keep having self-determination groups fighting, And we'll keep calling them terrorist groups, we'll keep calling them all sorts of names, and we'll keep having civil wars across Africa. And it will not be to our own advantage. The African Parliament must look into this situation and bring lasting peace. The African Parliament must throw up a continental referendum for all Africans to decide for themselves the kind of states that they want to belong to. Without that, there can't be lasting peace in Africa. That is what the African Parliament must do. What about ancient landmarks in Africa that Europeans named for themselves? What about Lake Nyanza? Lake Nyanza, which in year 1858 was renamed Lake Victoria. What about Mosi Oatonia, which in the year 1855 David Livingstone renamed Victoria Falls? The African Parliament must get back all these names back to the African names. What about colonial taxes that African states are still paying? Hundreds of billions of dollars paid to France annually. What about the ones that Britain signed with African states before independence, which mostly are kept secret? The one of Portugal, the one of Spain, and all these countries. The African Parliament must bring all of them and tear those documents to pieces and demand reparation for neo-colonialism and colonization of Africa. These are reasons why we must have an African Parliament, and there are several other reasons. But currently, we do not have an African Parliament, as I mentioned earlier. But there was the Malabo Protocol on 27th of June 2014 that seeks to give Africa a full-fledged parliament. The protocol needs a simple majority of 28 African states to sign it into law. And so far, only 12 African states have signed it, including Benin Republic, Cameroon, Chad, Equatorial Guinea, Gambia, Ghana, Mali, Madagascar, Togo, Sierra Leone. All African states must ratify this protocol, at least 28. Since we have 12, we need at least 16 more for this protocol to come into existence. Then we can have an African Parliament. And for this African Parliament to function effectively, the Parliament must have full-fledged power to make laws. And it should be an independent arm of government, not what we have in most African states and what we have even across the world, where the Parliament or the legislative arm is the rubber stamp of the executive. We must have something that is independent, and the legislative arm of the African government must be the most powerful arm of government, more powerful than the executive, so that we can have peace in Africa. It must be totally free from executive influence, free from African Union heads of states, in order for it to function properly and give us the result that we need. And secondly, those who are to be members of the African Parliament must be those who are guided by the 4 virtues of Africa. The virtue of godliness, 1. Number 2, virtue of Africanism. 3, virtue of the 3 stages of knowledge. And fourthly, finally, the virtue of courage. Virtue of godliness in that they must be God-fearing. God-fearing in the sense that they must be honest. They must fear the consequences of their actions, so that they will not be corrupt. They will not put themselves first and put Africa last. They will remember that there is God, and they will act according to that fear of God and deliver justice. 2, Africanism, in that they must put Africa first. They must not be leaders that put Europeans first or put themselves first. They must put the interests of the people of Africa and the continent of Africa first. And that drive to put Africa first will drive them to do their best for the people and the continent of Africa. Thirdly, they must have the 3 stages of knowledge, which are knowledge of what? 2, knowledge of why. 3, and knowledge of how, which are knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. Knowledge of what is going on across Africa. 2, knowledge of why Africa is poor and why Africa is still under colonization and why things are going on the way they're going on across Africa. And 3, how to make things right. And finally, number 4, virtue. They must have virtue of courage. Courage is the ability to advance in the face of danger. The ability to do and undo, even in the face of fear. The ability to march forward. That diligence, that bravery, that sustainability, formidability. all those characteristics that keeps you moving, determination, they need all this in order to function, because the task ahead is not easy. But when the going, say, becomes tough keeps going. And no matter how tough the task ahead of us is, it only requires us being strong, because it is dependent on how strong we are inside. And it's not even dependent on the circumstances around us. If we are strong and we have strong circumstances around us, but we're stronger than the circumstances, to be like nothing to us. So these are the qualities that we need. So let us pressurize our leaders from now to begin to sign the Malabo Protocol and to ratify it in order to have an African parliament, now that we know why we must have it. God bless the people of Africa, and let there be an African parliament, and let there be in the states of Africa, and let there be a prosperous African continent rising from last to first. God bless Africa.